Hello and welcome to the Property Investors Handbook podcast. I'm your host, Adam Bell, joined once again by Colleen Sutherland from Sutherland's Property Management Group. Now, today we're diving into a heartwarming aspect of property management, tenants who transform their rental into a cherished home. Colleen, it's fascinating how property becomes more than just a building for long-term tenants, isn't it?
It is. Thanks, Adam.
Okay, so do you see this often where tenants really, take on their rental property as their home and do things that many others don't?
They do. They enhance the home. So when you've got a rental property, you know how a lot of people say, oh, you drive past this house and you go, oh, I know, that's a rental property. I have a lot of tenants who you would drive past and wouldn't even know it wasn't not an owner-occupier. So,
Right.
Yes, they do.
Okay, what's the sort of common things that you see tenants do that, are making it into a home where others don't?
The most common one is the gardens.
Yep.
So what happens is the garden is very basic, mainly basic, unless an owner has lived there. But with a property, most of the gardens are just basic and low maintenance, so that the tenant, because it's in the tenancy, that
Yep.
they have to look after it. What I find is there are a lot of tenants who can make that garden still low maintenance. They've planted flowers or they've planted nice little bushes or something like that. They've been able to revive the grass.
Sure.
And then they mow, they weed, they whippersnip. They do all the things that you would
Do if you own the home
own
yourself.
the home, yes,
Yep.
but also, bring a little bit of life to the garden. So that's the main one, is the gardens.
Sure. Do you ever get any scenarios where tenants want to do, things that are a little bit more than just aesthetic and, because they do plan to be a long-term tenant, they
Yes.
do make it their home, that they then ask maybe the landlord whether they could go halves in the cost of doing something like, maybe putting in a really good veggie garden or,
Yes.
something, a little bit of infrastructure into something that isn't necessarily required, but again, makes it more of a home.
It does, yeah. We do have tenants like that. So there was one that was in a property for 16 years, and right at the start they knew that they were long-term tenants. And so they offered to the landlord that if he put in security screens, they would go halves with him for the security. So it makes the property more secure. They also went halves with him in installing some lights sensor lights.
Right.
So that,
Security
it lights up the backyard and things like that. So that's to them making the property a home.
For sure.
So making a house a home. So see, I even call it a property because I'm removed from it.
Sure.
But yeah, making the house a home, and they will now feel a lot more secure. Ordinarily, I would recommend that a landlord have security screens, have, a lot more security than just a standard one, the standard property. But with that, they feel a lot more secure. They are likely to stay longer because they feel so secure and they've made it their home.
Sure. But we should be clear here, and I'm going to take a stab. That obviously then becomes the landlord's property, those types of things that even though they've shared the cost,
Yeah, they're fixed.
They're fixed and
Yes.
they become part of the property.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
So then a property owner will go, oh no, I'll just pay for those because he knows he can claim it on his tax depreciation. It enhances his property that he owns, and the tenant can't take it with them. So it becomes a fixture of the house.
Sure. Have you ever seen where a tenant has requested an improvement to a place, not signalling that they want to go, share the cost or anything, where a landlord has just said no and they end up doing it themselves anyway?
Yes, I have, but we do, and while it's nice and comforting to say they're making it their home, I also have to stick to legislation.
Of course.
So that always sort of puts a dampener on things, and they go, oh, that property manager, she's a bitch. But it's not necessarily as easy as they think unless I have the landlord's approval for install, but you pay for it, or install and I'll pay for it, or there has to be an agreement for that to happen.
Sure. Is there paperwork for that?
Always paperwork. The paperwork's a killer.
Yep, sure. So what guidelines should landlords set for tenants who wish to make significant changes to a property?
So again, that comes under legislation. So legislation has recently been changed.
There's
I
legislation
know.
for everything.
I know. And sometimes legislation gets in the way of a good time.
Yep.
But yes, there is legislation and it covers just about everything. And if it doesn't cover it, they'll make it up. The
Right.
government will make it up. So we do have to go by legislation of what a tenant can and can't do, but a tenant needs to seek approval. So one of the pieces of legislation that's changed is that putting up picture hooks and securing furniture to the wall was two of the big things.
Right.
Now, we've always been of the mindset that if you, Mr. Tenant, seeks approval to put those picture hooks up, then you don't have to take them down, meaning you don't have to remove them, make good the little
Yep.
tiny hole or those 3M hooks.
Yep.
And they've ripped the paint off or whichever. So if you seek approval before you do it, 9 times out of 10, you just leave it there and go on your merry way when you move out.
Sure.
If not, and we have to make you remove them, you have to make good, meaning if you've taken them off the wall and it's damage to the wall, you have to fix the wall.
Right.
And the other thing is securing furniture to the wall. So
Which is a big safety thing these days.
it's a safety thing, yeah. So a landlord can't say no to that. Yes, it has to be done professionally and you can't just sort of tack it up there because that'll do. There is legislation and paperwork around that, but as long as you've sought that and you've been able to secure that bookshelf to the wall so that when little baby Johnny tries to climb up the bookshelf and can't pull it onto himself.
Yep.
It makes sense. It's just that they've made it so convoluted that I can't just say to you, yes, do that to protect your baby. I have to, go through
That is a
procedure.
isn't it?
Yeah,
because then you've got other legal requirements that these things have to be attached
Yes.
to a wall. So,
Yeah.
oh, goodness me.
And it's the same as a lean-to. So say you want to put a carport outside because you've got nowhere to garage your cars. There is so much legislation, not only by tenancy legislation, but council legislation. And then sometimes it's just not worth it. Or if you want to persevere and do the right thing, then we're happy to help you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so what about this one? So where you get to the point where a tenant wants to do an improvement, the landlord says, yes, let's call it new lights,
Right.
brighter lights or LED lights or something like that. What are what's the framework? What's the situation about who gets to pick the contractor?
So when it's lights will be a landlord responsibility regardless of you thinking you're improving the home. That is a landlord responsibility.
But what if the scenario I'm looking at here is, and we'll use lights unless there's a better example, but that the tenant says, no, these lights in here, they're not good enough at all. I'd really like to get new lights and I'm happy to pay for them. And the landlord says, well, look, if you want to, you can. I think the lights are fine. I'm actually not paying for them. But he agrees and says, yes, you can make that improvement. You're paying. Who then gets to choose the contractor?
The tenant.
Right.
Because it's the tenant's request and the tenant needs to engage a electrician. I can recommend the one that we would be using if it was the landlord, but the tenant needs to engage a electrician. You
Right.
can't just...
Oh, I
it's
get
easy.
that. But
Yeah.
do you then need to see who that is and have them checked
you'd
out
have to
before they can go ahead? So, because this is interesting, because having done many of these podcasts with you before, and we've talked about contractors, and you make sure, they're licensed, et cetera, qualified.
Yeah,
Now,
insured.
if this is handballed over to the tenant because they're paying, how can you be assured that all of those, ticks are in place for the contractor they get?
We then would let them know that we would need a copy of the invoice so that we know that if anything goes wrong, it goes back to that contractor.
Sure.
We would let them know it needs to be an electrician. It can't just be a handyman who
Of
knows how to
course.
wire them up.
Yep.
But to be the electrician. But having said that, with the lights, it's ceiling fans that we get the most request for.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if the landlord is adamant that, no, I'm not putting in ceiling fans, which again is another section of the legislation, which it's another day, but the tenant says, I'll pay for the ceiling fan to be installed.
Yep.
It's those sort of improvements that it's not just as easy to put a ceiling fan in either. It's got to be wired in, it's got to do this, that and the other. But the tenant still needs to provide the electrical contractor that who is going to install that ceiling fan.
Sure.
So it's more ceiling fans than lights.
Yep.
If you know what I mean.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, the tenant has to know you can't take that ceiling fan with you. It becomes a fixture of the property and it becomes a benefit to the landlord.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so
Gotcha.
it's a bit of a trick.
Fantastic. Well, look, I mean, it's pretty clear to me that when tenants and landlords, work together respectfully, it leads to well-maintained properties and satisfied long-term tenancies on both sides. So for landlords looking to foster such positive relationships, remember the importance of clear communication and written agreements always.
Absolutely.
Always. So visit spmg.com.au for more insights on effective property management, and reach out to Colleen and her team at any time that you have any issues or want to know anything more at all. So thanks again, Colleen, for coming into the studio, our new look studio now for those watching on YouTube in our nice comfy chairs. And look, join us next time as we continue to explore the dynamics of property investment and management.
Thanks so much, Adam.